Hello and welcome to the Private Corporate Counsel Podcast. Private Corporate Counsel Podcast is a podcast put on by Private Corporate Counsel, a law firm located in Orlando, Florida, serving the Florida community. Today, as our guest, we have Dan King. Dan King is a renowned business entrepreneur and coach. He has written a best-selling book, The Scorecard Solution, which I find to be very instrumental and will be a tool that I think I'm going to be using when I work with the business clients that I have to help them graduate from the level that they're in right now to the next level. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify what the next level is. I think Dan's book, The Scorecard Solution, gives a really good framework for that. Dan, welcome.
T, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you.
I've been waiting. You know, you mentioned this or maybe threatened it weeks ago. So it's great to finally be here with you.
I know you and I have known each other now for a little while. And in some respects, we play in the same sandbox. In other respects, our experience, our education, and our work history is extremely different. But where we cross over and where we have those similarities, I find it extremely fascinating because you have come up with several frameworks. And the one framework that I'm particularly interested in is this scorecard solution that you even went a step further and wrote a book about. Because I think that framework is a framework that is easy to understand, that can help a lot of entrepreneurs, and that can make a significant difference in what I call the lifeblood of our communities, which are the small and medium-sized businesses. Before I jump into that, though, I want to learn a little bit more about you and tell the audience a little bit more about you. I usually like to start off from where people are from, but I'm going to skip that today because I really want to know what really sparked your interest in the business world that got you so keen about working for a for-profit organization.
Right. Well, T, again, it's great to be here. It's interesting. You get a certain point in life, and I suppose in a career, where you look back and retrospectively now, I can see a pattern in my career, in my early professional life, that during that time I didn't recognize. And really, I would say that there were three phases after school, and candidly, I didn't have a tremendous focus in school, unlike yourself, where you had a distinct aim to become an attorney. You went to law school. I wandered around a bit, honestly, at school. So when I stepped out of school, this first phase of my career was big business, and I was a young kid. Fortunately, I had mentors. I didn't know the meaning of the term at that time. You're in your 20s. And I was thrust into a retail environment initially, Federated Department Stores. It was a precursor. And this was in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. And I progressed, and I was in a big business. I think it was $400 million in revenue. And I didn't know what I didn't know, but I had a mentor, and I had coaching, and I had people that guided me. And thankfully, the business was growing during that time. So I had new opportunities, new jobs. I got promotions, and it all seemed very natural. Frankly, it seemed a little too easy. And still being young and naive, I just thought this is how it is. And that was 12 years. That led to a move to KinderCare Learning Centers, another big business. So during this period, and again, I call that sort of the phase one, big public businesses, learning how to lead, learning how to manage a P&L, a budget, people. Very good foundational footing for me.
So that first stage of I would call that your professional life cycle, you have this opportunity to acquire a lot of knowledge specific to being a good entrepreneur. You had an opportunity to develop the skills and the abilities, and as important or more important, you had the opportunity to have good relationships that help to fill the gap for you and guide you in the right direction. And that catapults you from that position to, you said KinderCare? Tell us about that.
So KinderCare, most people know as a large childcare company. When I joined them, they had 1,200 centers around the country, taking care of 100,000 kids a day, if you can imagine.
Sure.
And when I came out of the retail opportunity, that was due to a merger. And I was asked to take a position moving from Atlanta to Cincinnati, Ohio. My wife and I discussed it. We had one young child at the time, and we chose not to make that move. So that left me in a position to look for a job. And a recruiter called about KinderCare, and he explained the position. And it was a chief operating officer role. And they were headquartered at that time in Montgomery, Alabama. And so I said to the recruiter, I said, Jim, I hear what you're saying, but there's probably two problems with this as I think about it. One, I know nothing about childcare. And secondly, I'm not sure I want to move to Alabama. And no offense to all the Tide fans out there. Frankly, I made the move, so it turned out to be a wonderful place. My wife and I loved Montgomery. Mm-hmm. Our daughter was born there, and we had 6 wonderful years. So it turned out okay. And in that environment, again, a bigger business, and I was continuing to hone my skills from the standpoint of leadership and leading people. And again, I had a mentor. There was a new CEO who recruited me, and he and I worked not only well together, we became good friends. And we did a lot of good things for that company. And my big takeaway after 6 years at KinderCare was the environment and taking care of your people. So if you can imagine, if you're a parent dropping your child off at a KinderCare center in the morning before you go to work, who takes that child from you matters.
100%.
And the biggest hurdle for that type of business, a big corporate childcare company with 1,200 locations, it's staff. How do we get and retain quality people? So when that parent hands that child off in the morning, it's not a different face every day, because that's concerning. So fundamentally, that was a for-profit company. KinderCare was in business to turn a profit. Mm-hmm. And if you have churn in your staff in that business, you'll have a churn in your customer base, and it threatens your profitability. So I learned a lot about creating an environment where people can thrive, and that stuck with me. When I left KinderCare, back to Atlanta with another big public company called Equifax, it all mattered. The environment is really what mattered. And how do you create a business environment where your people thrive? And I call it the commute conversation. What do your employees think about as they drive to work in the morning?
I love that, the commute conversation.
And it's with themselves, right? And
right.
So many people get in the car in the morning. They've had to take care of their kids, whatever other personal challenges. They got to get to work. What's that conversation in their mind?
Are they looking forward to going to work, or is this just another thing they have to do?
Right. And what's the commute conversation going home?
Yes. And
is it, I'm glad I'm done. I'm glad I'm out of there. I got at least a night to relax before I have to go back. And is the morning like, oh no, what's going to happen today? Right? Is that the commute conversation? And so what do you do as a leadership team and as a CEO or a business owner to create that environment? That culture where people really can't wait to get there.
I think I'm going to steal that from you, if it's okay with you, the commute conversation, because I think that the commute conversation is not something that your workers have only, but sometimes as a leader in the business, whether you own it or you have a senior leadership role, you're probably having that conversation with yourself too.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you and I know we talk to business owners every day, and some you almost have to coach them. Please don't share these feelings that you're having with your people, because they'll get frightened.
That's right. Yeah. So you move from KinderCare to Equifax. What a different environment. You're dealing with kids. You're dealing with people who interact with kids. You're dealing with parents, and you're not dealing with a lot of mechanical things. You're not dealing with things that are dry. You go into Equifax, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with technology. How did this experience you had at KinderCare impact Equifax?
Well, it's a great question. And frankly, they're very different environments. Equifax is now $5 billion business. And candidly, it was a culture and an environment that I did not thrive in. And because it was almost as though the instructions to management were, don't touch anything. It's all going to be fine. And it's like the Queen Mary. Equifax makes a lot of money selling your data, my data, to big businesses. And it's a needed service, clearly. As a credit bureau, Equifax doesn't care for that term. They're a financial services business, and they do have some wonderful products for consumers now. But for me, it was a little too mediocre in terms of the culture. And it planted some great seeds that helped me personally going forward about how to break the bonds of mediocrity, which is part of what I talk about in the book too. But I took a leap of faith, T. And a lot of us reach that point in our career where we want to try something that on the surface might look too risky.
Yeah.
But I had an opportunity. There was a venture capital backed technology company.
And that's what is that? ACI Connect?
All Connect.
All Connect.
All Connect.
Yeah.
And it was venture capital backed. It was a struggling business. It was 12 years in, a very entrepreneurial company, but there were 4 venture capital firms that had put money in, and they were still putting money in. And so financially, the business was not healthy. And the VCs were going to make one more attempt to turn this business. And I was recruited to help that happen.
So this is the beginning of your turnaround career.
Yes.
Let me jump back just a little, because I'm hearing that when you started off after school, you were dealing with people, customers, retail business. You were dealing with interfacing with the supply end and the customer end. And that gave you one type of experience. And then you go to KinderCare, and then you're dealing with children, you're dealing with people who are interfacing with children, you're dealing with parents. And so the customer segment's a little different there. The organization's a little different there. And then you go over to Equifax, and the interface is different there. And that may be more technology driven and more mechanical functions in terms of this is what you do and what you don't do. And the interface with the people was not as, I would say, as important. I want to use the word important because it's always important, but it wasn't as condensed as it was in the retail section or KinderCare. And so now you have these 3 different experiences, 3 different cultures, 3 different types of systems, 3 different types of businesses. And so how does that prepare you to even start to get into a situation where you're thinking, this is a great opportunity for you to use everything I have to help this business turn around? Well,
that's a great question. Yeah. I wish I had asked myself that question when I made that leap of faith, because I left a well-paying position with a lot of security to step into this turnaround. And my wife, frankly, thought I needed some coaching. If she'd have known you at the time, T, she would have said, T, talk to him. Yeah. This is not right.
Well, she's spending the money, obviously.
But I took that leap of faith, and I'm so thankful now because it led me to what I'm doing today. And the turnaround, I tend to look at things in a very simplistic way. And so when I first came in to examine that business, I consulted with them for a few months before I made a decision, because I wanted to convince myself that the business model was valid.
Yes.
Because I believed if the business model was valid, we could fix the other things. And sure enough, when I took a look, it was really three things: technology, the overall business strategy, and talent.
Which is a strong foundation in your book, The Scorecard Solution. And so was this when you started to develop that thinking and say, there's got to be a better way to do this, and start to develop the framework that you have in the Scorecard Solution?
Exactly. I mean, the book at that time, when I first stepped into that business, was not a thought whatsoever. But what we began to do, I began to see like this could be bottled. I mean, the solution, and this is, so I'm fast forwarding over 5 years or so in that business. We were able to take it from 12 million in revenue to 60 million. So by any financial measure, it was a success story.
Of course, yeah.
Now there are still challenges in the business, but that initial leadership team proved what we had to do. We got the business on a healthy footing. We could leave it with a new set of leaders and move on, and a transaction happened, and that business was sold. But it was in about the fifth year, and I was about a year from leaving that company. And now in my career, if you add it all up, T, I've been through these phases, right? The big company experiences, and then this turnaround. And I thought, well, I learned something in these last 5 years or so that I think the market could benefit from, and other businesses and business owners. And ironically, the prior 30 years, I learned a lot about the fundamentals. I learned how to do the budgets and manage people.
Yeah.
And take care of the things that mattered at a bigger company. But it was those 5 years that now put me on the path to what I do today.
And those 5 years really got you to the point where you're crystallizing your ideas, and that maturity comes into play. And then I'm not talking about personal maturity. I'm talking about the business.
We're still working on that.
The business maturity, the knowledge maturity that you have, and so right around that time you published this book in 2015, and then you start to venture on your own, and then transition from big company to turnaround to entrepreneurship. How was that transition?
A little frightening, and again, I'm back to being naive again. At that age of my career, you'd think I knew enough to do things probably mostly right, but not so much. Right, so it was a wake up call. I thought I had a beautiful network of CEOs and good contacts that would lead me to clients. It took some work, and the book, interestingly. First of all, you don't make money on a business book, but it opened some doors, and it helped. And I've got to tell you, I didn't want to write the book. Yeah, it was not a goal of mine. And
so why did you write the book?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was still at that company, this technology business that we turned around, and as I say, it was about a year left before I was going to depart. And I had someone like yourself actually in my office. We had an executive who needed coaching. And so I found a woman in Atlanta who, because our business was there, who was an executive coach. And I brought her in, and we're talking about this particular situation and this individual, what I thought would help him. And in the midst of that conversation, she asked me, like, well, what are you going to do next, Dan?
Did you expect that?
And so I explained a little bit about what I had in my mind. I said, I think I can help some other leaders.
Did she blindside you? How did you, when she approached you? What were you
I think I'd shared that I would begin to think about my exit at that point, and so she was curious what I had in mind, and I said, well, we had some success here, and I want to go out. I'm going to start a consulting firm, and I want to go work with business owners and CEOs and leaders on how they accelerate growth. And I was going to use the strategy, execution, talent. And I thought, okay, there's an interesting acronym. SET, get set to grow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's kind of interesting, but it's not going to bring clients necessarily. But she said to me, you need to write the book. Had not even contemplated writing a book. And she said, I said, why? For credibility? She said, no, for clarity.
Interesting.
For clarity. She said, Dan, if you put pen to paper and write down what it is you think you're going to do out there to help these leaders, your mind will shift multiple times.
Sure.
Well, I kind of half believed her, but I started to write the book, and she was right. She was right. So it helped me. I mean, the book, to be honest, I wrote it for me.
Yeah. I think it was Isaac Asimov that said, whenever I wanted to learn something new and master it, I wrote a book on it. And as you know, Isaac Asimov is a prolific writer.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of his books about science fiction and things like that were the basis for a lot of the movies and some of the technology that we use now.
Yeah.
So very interesting.
That's good.
So as we go into this, I mean, you focus on three things, I think. Two things: strategic focus and renewed commitment. And in that, you have several deliverables: goal clarity, strategy dashboards, commitment to the individual and the team level, and culture of accountability. Are those the focus items that you have when you deal with entrepreneurs now?
Very much so. It hasn't changed over the years very much. And frankly, I've had clients that are fairly large businesses, and I've had some very small. I don't do a lot of work with startups for various reasons. There are other people that are much better to help leaders at that stage. But the mid-market has been where I spend most of my time. And I think that your question is right on. I think the owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs, whatever that leadership looks like, they understand how their business operates. There's no shortage of ideas and strategy to grow.
Or optimism, for that matter.
Sometimes too much.
Too
right?
much. I call it hopium. There's too much hopium.
But the common pitfall is the execution, which gets to the talent component and the accountability, right? But it's turning a good idea into cash.
So you organize the material in the book in a very useful way, but you start off talking about this thing called organizational prowess, where data and talent and execution intersect, and you try to accelerate the execution to fill the gap and to help businesses thrive. So tell us a little bit about how you came up with this concept of organizational prowess and what it means to you.
Well, to be honest, the term has changed over time. Organizational prowess, to me, it's excellence. It's health. It's a vibrant organization that includes an environment where people are thriving. To me, the litmus test, if people thrive, meaning they like what they do, they're coached, they work for someone who supports them, then that's going to equate to financial success for the business, because you're going to have people who want to contribute, who want to give discretionary effort, meaning they'll go above and beyond. If they need to stay late to get something done, they do it thankfully, not because they're being forced to.
Yeah.
So I think it's organizational prowess is just a way. It's a term that basically encapsulates that kind of a culture.
Yeah, and data-driven, talent-driven, and focus-driven for the execution. When you talked about talent, you talked about this this problem that businesses have when they grow fast. The talent that you need for today is not the talent that you need for tomorrow. And so as the business accelerates in its growth and development, the talent qualifications diminishes. And I thought that was really fascinating, because most of the businesses I bump into that actually accelerate their growth and development, they don't really think about that issue. They think that the people that they use to get them where they are the same people who can actually get them to where they need to be tomorrow. In your experience, do you find that that's true, or is there a corollary to that?
Absolutely. Almost without exception. Teet, I think what you just said is so accurate, and what I've seen and you've seen many times is that growth, a company that's growing, and not all grow, and there are some healthy companies that are fairly stable, and the revenue might be comparable year after year, and that's okay.
And sometimes the goal is stability, not growth.
Right. But in a growing environment, growth always outstrips talent. And I wrote an article about that. And when a strategy is recast each year, and let's assume that you have a leadership team who come together every fall and they build a strategy for the following year. Well, if it's a growing business, that strategy is going to involve actions different from last year, right? And so it only follows that we might need a different talent quotient to execute on this new strategy.
And that's a different conversation, difficult conversation to have with your current team, isn't it?
Very hard, and it shines a bright light on the gaps, right? So there's a strategy talent chasm in a growing business, almost in all cases. Even businesses that from a distance, if you stood back and looked at it, say, wow, they're doing great. 10% growth, everything's fine. But that talent strategy chasm will catch up to them.
Yeah, I've seen it myself in many of the clients that I work with. And the talent deficiency is usually at the entrepreneurial level because they think that they can do everything that they need to do to take the business to the level that they want to take it to. And sometimes they just don't have the knowledge or the scale of the experience or the relationships and those types of things. And it's difficult to have that conversation with them because it's hard for them to let go and bring the people in who have that knowledge and skill and experience and ability. And so that talent piece is important. One of the things I thought was extremely useful in your book was this thing you call the Organization Prowess Scorecard. And so you developed a framework where you can provide entrepreneurs and leaders in businesses with information that they can actually score the organization on and have a numerical value. Why a numerical value?
Right. It's interesting when I first contemplated the book and the idea of a scorecard, I wasn't thinking so much about numbers and a numerical value. But when I began to put together my thoughts for the book, I went out and I talked to a lot of CEOs and business owners because I wanted to understand what they personally were faced with. What are their challenges? And what could I learn about how they face those challenges that I can incorporate in the book? And what I heard over and over was leaders love numbers. So I thought, all right, if we need to measure something to give us a baseline and then understand what needs to be addressed to address vulnerabilities or weakness, let's put some numbers around it. So that's really what led to that. And so it's a range from basically 10 points to 100. And you can imagine I broke that into quartiles so that we could put a label on it. And to me, it became a call to action. So when we've used the scorecard with clients and we come up with that numerical value, there's a gap because invariably no business scores 100.
Yeah. So what you did was you made an abstract concept pretty concrete.
We tried.
Yes. And gives the reader an ability to look at this and say, well, where's my 1.0? Where's my baseline? And be honest about that. And I imagine at first blush in your experience using your scorecard and working with businesses that you consult with, that first blush of the scorecard is maybe a little inflated?
Probably. In most cases.
In most cases. Why do you think that is?
I think it's the lack of data that leaders, entrepreneurs often have a very optimistic view of the health of their business. Maybe because by nature, entrepreneurs are pretty optimistic people.
Oh, they have to be.
Right. And so certain weaknesses in the business don't scare them. Mm-hmm. It's like, we'll fix this. It's like, we'll get through it. We'll do what we got to do. And they typically are able to do that. But as the business grows, as it scales, and as their role changes, and they can't touch everything anymore, mm-hmm. and they got to rely on a whole nother level of leadership, yeah. It's a whole different dynamic.
Yeah. So you have this baseline, which your framework is really useful for identifying. And then you go into this area where you start to collect data and analyze the data, and that brings a certain degree of clarity. How important is clarity in the process?
You got to have it. I believe that without real clarity about where are we, and a real honest view of where are we, and also of where we're going, mm-hmm. right? Because when we assess a business, it's not in the context of where we are today, because we're trying to take this business to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
I mean, the entrepreneurs you work with and the clients I have, they're ambitious and they have plans in 3 years or 5 to be at a very different place.
Yeah.
So we really have to start there. We really have to articulate that view of the future.
Yeah. So you're looking at the 1.0, they have to be extremely honest and real about what that is. This baseline, as you indicated in your book. And now they have this added job of articulating a strong vision, and getting clarity on what that vision is. And then you spend the rest of the book in between baseline and vision, which I think is a very, very difficult concept to grasp. But you focus on 3 main issues: strategy, planning, execution framework, and talent. And that's the what, the how, and the who. And beautiful job in sort of explaining that. Why did you focus on those 3 elements?
It just struck me as a framework that people could understand. Mm-hmm. I think when we do what we do, T, and we meet a prospective client for the first time, it's important to very concisely articulate how we can step alongside them and help them.
Yeah. Because
we're not experts in their business. And I will never claim to be. I am not an industry expert. I'm very agnostic. And yet I've helped teams in technology and manufacturing and retail, in professional services, in consumer services. So
organizational leadership fundamentals are fundamentals.
I expect an owner and his or her team to know the business inside and out. Mm-hmm. So they don't need me for that.
Yes.
So back to your question, the framework, it's to help them get unstuck, or if they're not stuck, to accelerate their growth. And so you need those 3 pieces. You need then some inspiring view of the future. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, people begin to question, why am I working so hard? Why am I here 8 and 10 and 12 hours a day? What is this all leading to? Mm-hmm. So we have to start with that inspiring view. And I even believe you need to start there before you assess the business. Mm-hmm. Because again, if you use the scorecard or whatever other method you may want to use to evaluate the health of a company, you're doing it based on where they are today. And if they have a plan to accelerate growth and to get bigger and better, then let's get clear about the view of the future, because now we can assess the business based on where we're headed. Mm-hmm. And I like 3 years. I've had clients that think they need a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. Mm-hmm. I believe that's a little too far out.
A lot can happen.
Because if you use 3 years, that's pretty tangible. That's mm-hmm. not that far, 36 months.
So when we're starting at the beginning of your process, this strategy planning process, and let's talk about the scorecard content of this phase. You're starting off thinking about data. In my experience, many of the people I work with don't have that much thought about data until you bring it to their attention. So what's your experience like, and what does it take for a company to start to shift their focus to identify and record and measure the data?
Well, there's something called leading indicators that we try to help clients uncover, because they review their financial results regularly, and that matters a lot. But that's the rear view mirror. That's how we did last month, how we did last quarter. The leading indicators are KPIs or business metrics that really, indicator is the right term. They're indicators of future performance. So when it comes to data, we want to collect the business metrics that matter and begin to track those so we can course correct, which gets into a whole nother realm of how we execute as a team. And the course correction is recognizing where we've deviated soon enough to where we can make some adjustments and get back on track.
And you need the data for that.
And you need data for that.
So this data aspect of it, that seems like something that's ongoing. It should be ongoing. But as part of your annual or your semi-annual planning process, I think you use the word homework in your book. How much of that homework needs to be done before you actually think about planning a planning session?
It's not extensive. I want leaders and whoever's going to participate in a strategy planning exercise to do a little homework, typically around a SWOT analysis and customer analysis, and then we may use the scorecard additionally. So there's 2 or 3 tools that come into play that helps us gather the appropriate data. It's often a humbling exercise because, again, assuming if we've got a clear view of that 3-year picture of what the business profile is in 3 years, and we've assessed based on that, so we bring that data into the session, and now we close the chasm because you have an inspiring view of the future, which should get people excited. Once you share that story with your people in the business, and now you have a very honest assessment of the current capabilities, and there's that gap. So now we have to close the gap.
Yeah, you came up with a score of 30 maximum for this aspect of your scorecard, the strategy planning portion of it. And you allocated another 30% to the talent and then 40% to the execution. Why is execution so important?
Because nobody's very good at it.
No one's very good. Why do you think? Why do you think no one's good at it? What's happening?
That's probably a bit of an overstatement, but it's the Achilles heel in many organizations. Even big, very sophisticated public businesses, you see some real gaps in execution, which in its most simplistic form, T, as you know, it's doing what we committed to do.
Yeah. It's what Stephen Covey, his son, not the one who wrote the 7 Habits, calls this the speed of trust. And he calls that performance trust.
Yeah. And
if you don't have the performance trust, you're not going to have anything else. And I think in your book, you refer to it as discipline.
Right.
You don't have the discipline to do it. It's not going to get done.
And somebody's got to hold people accountable.
So when you talk about that particular topic, you talk a little bit about ownership, metrics and visibility, accountability, expertise, and support. And that's a detailed aspect of the execution framework. How do you help a business identify those factors, evaluate those factors, and hold themselves accountable?
So T, I was with a client yesterday, very smart people, professional services organization. They sell services to businesses, and long-standing company, very solid reputation. And the first thing the CEO said to me when we met was, we just can't seem to execute. We're all smart people. We get in the room, we decide on what has to get done and what our strategic bets are going to be. And lo and behold, the ball keeps getting dropped. And they had a senior team offsite meeting in February this year. And I'm in the CEO's office yesterday, and he showed me the notes from February. And there were 3 or 4 pretty important strategic initiatives that their senior executives had signed up for and agreed to. And I said, how are you doing on these things? Because it's July. You're 6 months. Not real well. And so
you probably saw a sense of desperation on his face, or at least frustration.
So, and these are, again, very bright people.
Yeah.
And they had no trouble identifying what had to get done. Mm-hmm. It's just that they're so busy with their day job that they couldn't address these initiatives that they all agreed had to be done. And so now here they are 6 months later, they've lost 6 months.
Yeah.
And so this is why.
And that 6 months goes by like that.
And this is why companies stall out.
Sure.
Because to grow, they've got to do some things differently.
Yeah.
And those strategies were all correct. It's just that they don't have what I call the framework, which means they need to write down what's going to get done, by when, by who, and then there's a cadence, right? And that CEO, and I had to tell him yesterday, excuse me, but part of your job is to hold the team accountable and bring them together. I said, now, you don't have to do that forever. I said, it's going to get easier when you have team accountability. Yeah. But that's a new muscle that your team needs to develop.
And so you went into the book on, when you talked about talent, you went into this idea of A versus B players, and how do you identify an A player? In fact, that was one of my favorite parts of the book.
Yeah.
I booknoted with my business card, and I looked at your leader competency scorecard, which you have at table 6.1 on the book. For those who are listening, page 131. And you have a pretty strong analysis there on the leader competency scorecard. And then you go on and you have an expert competency scorecard. That is a tool that I think leaders can utilize in organizations and take it away from the personal relationship, emotional aspect of it, and make it more analytical. How did you come up with such a framework?
Well, I think just from experience.
Yeah.
I think in all those environments that we talked about earlier led me to sort of looking at most organizations hierarchically.
Yeah.
You have a leader, there's somebody at the top of the pyramid. And then you have another segment of leaders. Then you have managers who I think really need to be coaches more than managers. And then you have skills, right? You have the experts who are very good at certain skills and technical skills, et cetera. And how you measure each of those layers of an organization is a little bit different. And with the leadership, it's being able to move beyond the day job. And that's part of the conversation yesterday I referenced with the CEO, is that his leadership team need to think about how to execute on things that are not the day job, because they're all professionals. They're all very good technically. And they've risen up to where now they manage others. And you got to think beyond the technical skills.
That was really, I thought, a phenomenal framework that you use. And that's something that you can actually make a copy of from your book and give it to an entrepreneur and say, this is your leadership team, evaluate them, and let's talk about that when you're done. And you can probably even give that to the leadership team as well, says evaluate yourself. And let's see how close you are to what I'm thinking. And it takes away a lot of the uncomfortable conversations, hopefully.
Yeah.
So wonderful tool. You go through, when you're dealing with the execution framework, you have 2 guiding principles: performance tracking and goal alignment. And then you have 8 elements on there, 4 must-haves and 4 should-haves. But then you sneak in this 9th element in there towards the end of that discussion, and you call it discretionary effort. Tell us a little bit about discretionary effort. The others are pretty self-explanatory: execution, champion, strategic ownership, strategy communication, expertise, individual goals and accountability, dashboard review, executive support, and consequence of results, whether good or bad. But then you sneak in this discretionary effort in there. And I thought to myself, wow, this really almost deserves its own chapter. How did you come up with that concept of discretionary effort? And what have you seen in terms of the impact of that on organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, T, I don't see it as often as I would like.
Yeah.
Even in my own career and in the bigger corporate environments we talked about, discretionary effort wasn't real apparent. And unless, as a leadership team, you did the things to create the culture in that environment where people thrive, we talked about. But it's another leading indicator. When you see discretionary effort among some percentage of the workforce, that's a sign of a very healthy business.
Yeah.
Where people willingly, without being told or being forced, go beyond. They do more than what's on their job description.
Yeah.
And it's not just because they want to get ahead or they have some selfish motivation. It's because they care. They truly care about that business. And they care about the people they work with.
And these are really truly A players.
Well, yeah. And the interesting thing with A players, and this may sound counterintuitive, and we may have people that even disagree. You don't want too many. You don't want too many A players, because it's not just about a discretionary effort, because discretionary effort can be given by a B player.
Yes.
Now, we don't need to get into the C players, because there's probably not many businesses that need many of those.
Right.
Which is you're not sure they're getting it done. You have to constantly keep an eye on a C player.
In graduate school, I took this course called Organizational Leadership. And one of the books that we read was Organization as Metaphors. What it did was identify certain metaphors and apply them to organizational theory and behavior. One of them was organization as a machine. And if I were to think if there's a space for C players, it would be in organizations that operate like a machine, where it's more mechanical. Organization as a brain, that's more of the A player game. And it would seem to me, as you indicated in your book, that if you're looking for A players, they should be on your leadership team.
Well, probably, but even below. Even in the middle part of the organization, you need some A players. The way I like to think about it, T, is, and the reason I said you don't need too many is because the definition of an A player is someone who's very driven. They want to excel. They're going to outperform their peer group, and they want the next job. Yeah. And so you can imagine an organization full of people like that will be chaotic. So you want a few. And the exercise I like to use with the owner or CEO is we pull out the org chart. Now, if they don't have the org chart, that's another problem. But let's look at the org chart. And then I'll ask, circle the boxes that are mission critical. And he or she might say, well, what do you mean by mission critical? What are the positions in this company that are critical to growth, critical to strategic execution, critical to customer satisfaction? And there's only a handful, almost any business.
Yep.
It's this one, it's this one, it's this one. And I said, okay, let's talk about who's in that box. And these are where you need the A players, right?
So it's not leadership necessarily, it's mission critical.
I think so.
And how do you define mission critical?
The execution of our strategy.
Right.
So if this is an organization that's got that 3-year view, crystal clear, a lot of clarity, as we talked about, and now they've got a strategy for the next 6 months or 12 months, and they're executing and they're reviewing progress on a regular basis. certain positions are fundamental to that execution. Yeah. And that's where our recruitment strategy has to come into play, because I don't think I've ever had a client that we worked with who didn't have to rethink how they recruit, because everything we're talking about here shines a bright light on talent. Mm-hmm. And if there's somebody hiding in a corner who's in a mission critical role, we've got to address that. Mm-hmm. And it's uncomfortable. I have had clients, as we work together and that spotlight starts to look in the bowels of the organization, and we identify somebody or something that's not been addressed. I call it normalized defects. Mm-hmm. It's something we've grown to accept over time, and it's holding us back.
Mm-hmm. Normalized defects. And when you have a leader, an entrepreneur, if it's a small and medium-sized business or someone in the C-suite, how do you get them to identify and address these normalized defects?
We do it in a group. Mm-hmm. The client I mentioned, where I was yesterday, we had a little get-together with their senior leaders, 9 people in a room. And people will be honest in the comfort of a group. Now, I tend to do individual interviews with everybody first. Mm-hmm. So I had people, some more candid than others, mm-hmm. as you know. But I got a lot of insights from those individual interviews. Now we come together, and with a whiteboard or a flip chart, I asked the question, what are the normalized defects? And of course, I have to define that.
Yes.
A lot of people they think they know what that means, but they'd like to hear me say. I say,
are you saying I'm defective?
These are, these are either behaviors
right.
or situations mm-hmm. in the business that, for whatever reason, we've accepted. We walk past it every day. We haven't addressed it. It's some people call it a sacred cow. Mm. Sometimes that's a person who, for whatever reason, the relationship or something, where they're untouchable. And so we get into these workaround situations. It's going to hamper growth. So do we want to identify normalized defects, things that are holding us back, mm-hmm. and eradicate them? That's my suggestion.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I go through the journey of you writing this book and reading your thoughts as you go through, you wrote this and published this in 2015, 9 years ago. What has changed from then to now that makes you reflect back on this book and go, wow, I got it right?
Yeah. Very little has changed. Very little has changed. Yeah. I think the work that I do with clients has changed, mm-hmm. but the challenges that I've discovered within client organizations hasn't changed mm-hmm. from when I wrote the book, and even earlier. Right now, I've changed. I've adopted better tools, mm-hmm. better methodology, better ways to help teams excel and overachieve. But the fundamentals, the business challenges are essentially the same.
Yeah, it just repeats itself.
Do we have the right people? Mm-hmm. Do we have a clear strategy? Are we executing?
Yeah,
it's pretty fundamental.
Yeah. Now, would you like to share some of those new tools that you've either developed or discovered?
Well, one is the scorecard. You mentioned it, and the organizational prowess scorecard has evolved over those years, and it's taken on different names, different content.
What do you call it now?
I'm calling it the value enhancement scorecard.
Ah,
because interestingly, I'm working a lot these days with owners who have a desire to sell. They want to turn their hard-earned equity into wealth at some point. And to the extent we have success on the growth plan, they ask me questions like, well, we're doing really well now, Dan. I mean, thanks to your firm's help. What's my company worth? Mm-hmm. Or who would buy me? Mm-hmm. And so we started to use the term value enhancement because owners, and you know this very well, they don't get up every day thinking about what matters to a buyer, nor should they necessarily. But where they focus every day is to keep the business humming, obviously to make a profit, take care of their people, take care of their customers. But when you start talking about enhancing value, that's a whole nother conversation. Now we have to look at the business through the eyes of a buyer.
And what is value? What are the elements for value? And what do we look at? I imagine a lot of those things overlap with the scorecard.
Absolutely. They really do. There's a lot of overlap. And when a buyer looks at a business as a potential acquisition, they have their own financial models, right, to determine what they think that price is, and that value is.
So what else would you add to your book? I mean, if you were to say, I'm going to write the Scorecard Solution 2.0, what changes? What do you add to it?
That's a great question. I think there'd be some things around value enhancement, which addresses things like customer diversity, recurring revenue, leadership and succession. Again, things that if an owner is thinking about an exit, or maybe not a complete 100% exit, but a partner where he or she is prepared to give up some equity to take on, let's say, a financial partner who can really fuel growth, which can be a great, I think, path for an owner. And I'm having more and more conversations because you've got younger owners who aren't ready to be done, yet they've got to come up with some serious capital if they want to expand. I have a client today that has some very solid anchor clients with multiple locations in multiple states, and that those clients are pleading with my client to help me. Come with us. We need you in Alabama. We need you in Georgia. We need to have a satellite office in West Florida, not just East Florida, and that takes money. And so there are models now, thankfully, that are available where it's not simply a throw the keys on the table and here's my company, thank you very much. They still have a lot of runway, and that owner might be in his or her 40s or 50s. But the idea of the partner who can inject capital and help them execute on that growth plan, and then there's a second payday, right? That can be a beautiful scenario for an owner who isn't ready to step aside, take some chips off the table, continue to run the business. Now, you got to be careful it's a partner you like. You want to work with somebody you like.
They have to be suitable.
Right.
Yeah.
But then that second bite of the apple in a few years where now they've got equity and arguably what's a much bigger entity.
Sure.
That's kind of exciting.
Yeah. I mean, you talk a little bit about that suitability issue in your book when you talked about the talent. How difficult is it to identify, not only whether they get it or they have the capacity to do it, but whether they're suitable, the right temperament, the right grit, the right level of humility. I think you use humility a few times as well. Those things that we don't really pay much attention to, and you don't see them in a resume. How important are those suitability factors?
Well, they're critical, and I'll be the first to admit I am no expert on assessments, personal assessments, individual assessments to get to some of those attributes on people, but I really advocate that companies adopt tools that help them measure those things. I think attitude trumps aptitude almost always. And I have clients that they'll hire people based on their willingness and attitude, and they'll train them what they need to know as far as skills and technical knowledge, what have you. But I don't claim to be that expert on talent assessments and overall talent management.
There's so many options available to businesses now. Whether one is more effective than the other or any of them are effective, who knows? But there certainly are a lot of choices. Dan, going through your book, talking to you today. What a fascinating conversation. As we transition, I want to talk a little bit about AI. This is a new thing. This is the new hot thing that's available. Everyone and their children are talking about artificial intelligence, about it being a tool to replace workers, to accelerate growth and development, to squeeze more juice out of the fruit. Have you seen any issues, positive or negative, with AI that you think warrants a place in your next book, if you were to write a book that picks up where you left off?
I'm probably not going to delve too deeply into AI in my future writing, because that's just not a topic that I'm ever going to become an expert on. Mm-hmm. Now, my guidance with clients, because they invariably ask about it, because it's all around them, is to evaluate it very carefully. Mm-hmm. And evaluate it within the context of the functional areas of the business. Mm-hmm. Do you want to adopt AI tools in your technology environment, in your HR environment, in your customer management environment? There's tools for all these things, and I think you need, as a leader, to get with your senior leaders and the leaders of those functional areas and have a conversation. And have a bit of a roadmap as to how you dip your toe into this world of AI, because there are risks.
Yeah, it's so difficult to navigate. You build a certain level of competence in what you're doing, and then all of a sudden there's a big disruptor, and you just don't have enough information about what it is, how it impacts you, and how other people can use it to impact you. How scary is that for some of the businesses that you're working with?
Well, again, I think it's so intriguing as a topic that you have people that are just leaping into this. Yeah. And my advice to my clients has been establish some level of governance as to how it's going to be adopted in your business. And because young people in companies, whether they're in technology, or I've talked to people in HR who want to use AI for talent acquisition and assessments, and they're readily adaptive, right? Mm-hmm. They're early adopters. They will try things, and I'm hearing horror stories now of where certain AI tools have been brought into companies that have just kind of created all kinds of cyber problems and risks and security breaches. So again, the governance, it's, if you have an IT leader, that is probably the point of the spear, where an individual needs to develop with the CEO or with the owner a precise business philosophy, if you will, as to how we're going to use this AI thing. And it starts with evaluation, very prudent research, and move slowly. That's my advice.
So, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and spend some time with me today. I really appreciate that you actually wrote this book, because I think, hands down, it was one of the most practical and useful books for entrepreneurs today. And I think not only for entrepreneurs, but leaders in mid-size and large cap companies as well. It gives them a way of looking at the abstract and make it concrete, gives them a roadmap, if you will, that they can actually utilize. And I think it's going to be useful to me. I know I'm going to take some of the nuggets in there and work them within my frameworks that I use with my clients. So thank you so much for doing this.
T, it's been a pleasure. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me in.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for joining us on this episode of the Private Corporate Counsel Podcast. The book, again, is The Scorecard Solution by Dan King. It's available on Amazon. Worth the read. You can pick it up today. You can probably finish reading it by the end of the week, and you can start implementing some of the strategies that Dan provides in the book within the next week. And of course, you can always contact Dan himself. He works as a business consultant. Dan, give us your information so that if anyone wants to contact you. They can.
D. King at Close Reach Consulting, CLOSEREACH consulting.com.
Well, thanks again. And looking forward to seeing you again next time with the next Private Corporate Counsel podcast.
Contact us at 877-647-7887 or email us at info@pcc.law to learn more about the Private Corporate Counsel program and how we can help you and your business on your journey to success.